While people are still arriving, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the Every Learner Everywhere Expert Network powered by ISTE. The Every Learner Everywhere network recently launched our expert network to offer professional learning and coaching for higher ed faculty and leaders to support their students through and beyond the COVID crisis, including the transition to digital learning. We encourage you to visit the Expert Network website. We are posting the link in the chat for you so that you can get more information and possibly even schedule a coaching session. So welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Strategies for Success in Online Teaching and Learning interactive conference series. It is a pleasure for us to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I'm the manager for network programs and services with the Every Learner Everywhere network. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to take just a few minutes to tell you about the Every Learner Everywhere network and the mission of our program. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of 12 higher education organizations with expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practices. Every Learner Everywhere is one of 3 solutions networks sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The other 2 networks focus on advising and developmental education. We work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-impacted students, and students of color. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's presentation, which will be shared after the webinar. Throughout the presentation, we do welcome your questions. This is a live Q&A panel, so we welcome your questions in the Q&A section. If participants raise their hand during the presentation, we will not be able to unmute them. However, we will be monitoring not only the Q&A section, but we will be monitoring the chat as well. As a biology professor and associate dean, I am excited about today's panel discussion on inclusive teaching. Our moderator for today's panel is Dr. Ryan McTaggart. I hope I said that right, Ryan. Manager for Professional Learning for EDUCAUSE. Dr. McTaggart is driven by opportunities to help move the needle forward in individual and collective lives of the amazing people he gets to work with. Prior to joining EDUCAUSE, Dr. McTaggart held positions as faculty at Colorado State University and as an analyst for a management consulting firm after starting his career teaching middle school and high school. He is passionate about the application of organizational development, change management, leadership systems, and personal development to educational environments. Ryan has a BA in history, an MS in sports science, and PhD in education and human resource studies. Today's panelists, we have 3 of them, although you only got to hear about 2 of them on the description. We have 3 of them today. We have Dr. Elaine Villanueva Bernal And we have Dr. Sharice McBride and Dr. Crystal Moore Clemens, who all three happen to be professional coaches from the Every Learner Everywhere Expert Network. Dr. McBride is a researcher of digital literacies and teacher learning at the University of California, Berkeley. Her PhD study developed the construct of humanizing critical digital pedagogies, a frame for honoring the lived realities of non-dominant communities through socioculturally situated understandings of technology. A teacher, educator, and educational leader, Sharice is a former high school English teacher and has coached teachers and higher ed faculty across the range of content and educational settings. She holds degrees in English literature from UC Berkeley and in secondary education from the University of San Francisco. Dr. Clemens has advanced racial and gender equity in digital learning through her work in K-12 education, higher ed, and nonprofit management. In her academic leadership, she has shaped curriculum and fostered positive academic experiences in face-to-face and online environments. She is the director of the CDF Freedom Schools, a literacy and cultural enrichment program for K-12 students in underserved communities. A native of Chicago, Crystal has degrees in education and cultural studies from Washington State University, UNC Chapel Hill, and Duke University. And assuming that everything works right, like it's supposed to, we should also be joined by Dr. Elaine Villanueva Bernal, who is a lecturer at the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, California State University, Long Beach. Dr. Bernal has been teaching chemistry at CSU Long Beach for 15 years and has served as the coordinator for the College of Natural Sciences and Math, connecting students to industry and working with faculty on curriculum. She is passionate about connecting chemistry to community and serves as an expert in engaging students of all backgrounds in STEM education, as well as serving on 2 National Science Foundation projects serving Latinx students. Dr. Bernal has extensive experience in K-12 student outreach, educational technology, and e-learning industry. Before entering higher ed, she worked as an aerospace industry failure analyst. She earned her Master of Science in Material Science Engineering from UCLA. Elaine has earned a Master's of Art in Education Technology and Media Leadership, as well as her doctorate in Educational Leadership from CSU Long Beach. Elaine should be joining us a little late. We had to do some finagling due to power outages across the country and things like that. But in the meantime,
I'm here, Norma.
Oh, she is here. There she is.
Sorry, I thought you saw me join in. I'm like, oh no.
I heard, I just didn't see.
Okay.
But this is going to be a wonderful conversation with 3 of our expert network scholars and Dr. McTaggart trying to wrangle it and everything like that. So I am going to hand it over to you, Ryan, for today's presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Norma. And thanks, to the panelists. And really, as the moderator, my goal is to get them and their voices in front of everyone as much as possible. So like Norma said, we have some questions that we thought of ahead of time, but do use the Q&A section and we'll do our best to bring in those questions as well. But I just kind of want to start with what I would consider kind of an overarching question, and then we can dive into some of the specifics. But the shift to remote learning has not only created new challenges for institutions of learning to deliver high quality, equity-focused education, but I think what's really interesting is it's also unmasked some hidden problems that are absolutely not new, but have now come to the surface of experience. And so I'm kind of wondering, to start us off with, is what inequities have you all noticed that have been continued or even expanded in this shift to remote learning and the pandemic response? And are there any of those inequities that you feel like the shift has brought meaningful change forward for? And I'll just open it to all 3 of you, to whoever wants to jump in, I think.
It seems like we all, want to give each other space. I appreciate that. I'm Sharice McBride. It's my pleasure to be here and be able to share with all of you. I really appreciate that question. I think across our society, we've been reflecting on the challenges that have really come to the fore with the intersecting pandemics we've been dealing with in the COVID national or global pandemic, as well as the systemic racism that has plagued our society for a very long time and now is being, has been broadcast on television and across media. And so, and as we think about the challenges that these pandemics present to learning environments, as you stated, Ryan, these are not problems that are new to our educational system. As far as the inequities around access to quality education and access to particularly digital devices, and the ways that students have had trouble connecting. I think that what is new is that now we're forced to rely on digital technologies in order to stay connected to schools. And I think what's happened is that with those challenges around access, we've had to now consider what will we do to meet those needs. And one area that I do think some new attention or bridging of those inequities has happened is, for example, with the CARES funding, that's helped us to think about access and attention to how students will need just that initial connection. It's really normalized the ways that we need help. It's normalized these notions of mental health challenges and stress as reaching across different populations. And it's really leveled the playing field as we move to home as a center of learning. And I can say a lot more about each of those, but I think those inequities have really been highlighted, and we've just begun as a nation to think about how we need to put resources behind addressing them.
I can go next. I agree totally with Charisse. In addition to everything that she's mentioned, I would also say that some of the inequities that have come up is this notion of a one size fit all type of pedagogical approach to teaching and learning. And what we realize, I think, when you're going through your doctoral programs as PhD students, we're so focused on our content and being experts in our content area that we often don't have that opportunity to really focus on pedagogy and student engagement. And, you just go in and you be the best because you're focused on tenure, promotion, and making sure you're advancing your own research agenda, and not necessarily about how well students are engaged. And so I think the meaningful change that's coming from that is, we're taking a more student-centered approach. We're thinking about pedagogy in new ways, right? And we're thinking about ways to think through technology. A lot of times we like to say, just because you're a quote unquote young person, that you are a digital native. And we take for granted that, students, because they have devices, that they necessarily know how to use all of those platforms and learning management systems, et cetera. And so what it is forcing us as faculty members in universities to think through, how do we really engage students, and how do we make sure we onboard students and train students so that all of the technology at their fingertips is actually accessible to them as a learner. And then finally, I would say it's forcing us to kind of rethink culture and culturally responsive pedagogy. And it goes back to my previous point about this one size fit all mode of instruction. If a student had to miss class because they had to work or they had to take care of a family member or something like that, it was really frowned upon. Well, now we're all working remotely. We're all living and learning and supporting one another in our home spaces, as Charisse noted. And so you have to create those synchronous and asynchronous moments so that your students don't miss the content. And it's pushing us in a new way. And I'm one here for it and appreciate it, because I don't want any students to be left behind as we move forward in this new way.
Yeah, just to add what Charisse and Crystal said, I'm learning to navigate ways to use technology, not just to communicate with my students like, oh yeah, here's the homework that needs to be done today, but really using technology to communicate the content well. So so I teach chemistry at Cal State Long Beach, and more recently also started teaching global climate change at Dominguez Hills, so a couple of our Cal State campuses. And I've more so, I've had to rely on visual communication. It's not just, hey, I'm in the classroom, here's the PowerPoint, right? But really taking advantage of tools that are available from my disciplines to communicate what I need to communicate to my students so that they have a sense of what's happening with the material. Also, on a more personal level, I feel that with the pandemic, I've been able to more personally connect with my students. I grew up in a really big Filipino family, and it was always like I was always living in a multi-generational home, always kind of like close quarters, didn't have privacy, right? So it's been interesting to draw back on those experiences growing up, especially in education, right? And then relating that to my students, especially with a lot of first generation college students. A lot of my students are maybe they're the oldest in their family and they have to take care of their younger siblings, or mom and dad lost work, right, because of COVID, and they've had to step up and work full time, right? So it's so interesting to see the personal really merge into these professional spaces. And so it's been an interesting challenge to go back and forth and sort of mesh all that together.
Yeah, I think from all three of you, there's an interesting theme of the ability to almost be more humanized when you're not with this like distance, which is not what I think people would have expected, but it happened that way in places, not everywhere. We did get a question in chat that I want to honor because I think it was in relation to the comment made. I think, Crystal, I think you were talking at this moment, but all of you touched on specific tools and using technology. And someone asked if you've seen evaluation and assessment tools using phones in particular because of that access to the digital platforms, effective for gauging students and in line with equity issues. So kind of, if we don't have access to laptops or tech like we would on campus and a phone is all they have you all experienced anything with that? Like them posting videos or solving math and science problems via that tech?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I can start off with that because I actually try to focus on using tools that students can access just by phone. Because even like, say for example, my oldest son is in high school, so he's in 10th grade, and even at the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, even having access to computers, like he has access to computers at home, but he still relied on his phone because that's like his world in a way, or a big part of his world. And then so I noticed the same thing with my students, and thankfully, even pre-pandemic, I was using mobile phone apps that where students can practice drawing molecular shapes and geometries and everything, and practice naming compounds, like all through the phone. And then also I try to focus on other virtual lab simulations that can be accessed by maybe like an iPad or a phone as well. So I think kind of keeping that in mind, knowing that students, even before pandemic, right, they didn't necessarily have access to laptops or maybe desktop computers. That's really helped in this continuing, virtual learning and teaching space.
Yeah, I agree. Part of my service work that I do, I volunteer with a virtual Saturday Academy once a month for K-12 students, and our National Society of Black Engineers junior chapter. We use things like Google Classroom and Flipgrid, and so students can do those things on their phones or their parents' phones, and they can take pictures of the work that they're doing on pen and paper and upload it to the different modules so that it's not so high tech that they can't participate and that they can't engage with one another. And then in terms of my own, teaching and learning, I don't put pressure on students to always share their screen. I don't put pressure on students to always have to be on the Zoom. You can use your app on your phone, because I know that, as Elaine mentioned, I grew up in a house with multi-generations as well. And, there's lots going on in the background. And so I want to be mindful of that. And so by having those mobile apps, and using things that are readily accessible via a phone or a tablet has, I think, made a difference in the level of engagement, and it takes some of the pressure off of our students.
I agree with what's been said. Elaine, I'd love to hear like some specific tools if you have any that you could name. I think I agree also with that principle of just allowing tools that are that are device agnostic, that you can go on and find across different devices, so they can use them if they have a Chromebook or if they have a high-powered laptop, but that they can also find an app version. And what that requires from teachers and instructors is a degree of tinkering and being able to look around and seeing what would this be like from a student experience. Is it intuitive enough to build upon like their existing repertoires of practice? Is it, does it have those participatory elements where you can just kind of click and upload? You can, go in and maybe record within the platform itself and just, click submit rather than having to take multiple steps. And even using affordances that are usually built into phones, for example, a voice recorder, and being able to have them narrate their experience with something. Using those multiple modes of communication also allows opportunities for accessibility, and that's another form of inclusion, and giving students multiple choices of how they want to be assessed, right? They can do the voice thread or like a voice memo, or they can take a picture and upload something and write a paragraph about it. But I think the key is to meet the students in their spaces of learning. I think that's one of the things that's come with this distance learning space, like I said, is bridging. When we talk about connecting to what, right? Rather than always thinking about how can I get students to come to me, how can I go to where students are? How can I widen my aperture for thinking about what learning is to meet their lived realities and what is already occurring in their ecosystems of learning. So I want to see learning as it's happening in their spaces. So that's whether that's through a picture or an audio narration or some written artifacts, allowing multiple forms of meaning making to come through is really important. And that can be across a variety of tools and with the kinds of things that they already have accessible.
Very cool. Thanks, Elaine, for sharing that link too in the chat if folks didn't see that. So to continue that theme, because I know that there is some pushback from, I don't want to lump faculty into one group, but I'm going to kind of do it here. But if we get pushback from faculty on using those tools, I think some of it is trying to just do what was always done in person online, but that doesn't really work because you have to bring in new tools and try new things. And someone asked specifically in the chat, so to get us onto what they were looking for, is getting pushback from faculty, especially math or early science, to use remote proctoring tools. And there's a concern about equity issues related to access to tech and also bandwidth use, and if that's enough bandwidth for every student. And then also invasiveness of having AI and those kinds of technologies into individuals' homes instead of being centered on campus. So do you all have any thoughts about how to help faculty kind of adjust to these new ideas or opportunities?
I think this also speaks to a larger issue with, the purpose of learning and the purpose of education. So what I'm going to say now might be controversial, but I want students to learn for learning's sake. And because we're experiencing learning within the midst of a global pandemic, I want our deans, I want our provosts, I want us to really think through assessment and how we are going to measure our students. And so I know for me, in my own lived experience, I am not going to require artificial intelligence and different programs and stuff where they don't have the bandwidth to do that. I might do workarounds, and some of my workarounds might be one-on-one sessions with students. It may take a little bit more time, but if I space it out, I know I can support students in a unique way. And so I'm having a hard time with all of these assessments and these grades and everything. And so I hope that we can have a larger conversation about the purpose of education and learning, because I don't think it's related to digital learning. So.
Yeah, I tend to be a grade questioner too, so don't worry, you're not alone, at least in that. I'm going to keep that question going to Elaine and
Yeah.
Charisse, but I want to add another one too, because this is related. Helping faculty understand that requiring students to have their video camera on doesn't mean that they're engaged. So whether their camera is on or off may not indicate engagement. I think that's tied to the same idea. So I just wanted to wrap that idea in. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, I personally don't use proctoring tools, even though my students have asked me about it, because they're required to do that in their classes. And this is where I kind of like put my personal political hat on too with my students, like, hey, there's enough policing that's happening in this world. It doesn't need to happen in my classroom. I tell them that from day one. I'm not afraid to get a little personal and political in my classroom, even though it's a science classroom, where yeah, I've shared with students, I grew up in the Philippines, towards the tail end of martial law. So, I have that informed and lived experience, and I don't need to have that in my classroom. And also to add for having cameras on or off, I try to do things like giving students the option to respond either verbally or on the chat. For some reason, that really helps, like giving students options on how to respond to things. Polling features, or like even using a Jamboard. I'll now drop that on the chat if folks aren't familiar with that. So just ways where students can passively, share feedback rather than being verbal, because you're always going to get those group of students, even like face-to-face, right, that are just, like raise your hand, right? But I think especially with the educational technology tools that are available, there's more opportunity to engage the more passive, response, for students.
Yeah, I appreciate those suggestions. I think it made me think about how a classroom looks when we were in person. I think that some of these challenges to moving online and the ways of wanting to see student faces, it makes me wonder about what's behind that priority. What's behind having to see student faces? Is that about students, or is that about faculty? I think about is that, it just makes me wonder, lectures, and, speaking to one another, because if we want to see what students are learning, what's the evidence of that? Is it, I think about joint productive activity and the ways that students can create things together and that they can share like their ideas. I'm not seeing ideas if I'm looking at students necessarily. I mean, they may give some feedback, but there are many, many other ways, as Elaine was just referring to, that they can put their ideas on the screen, or, in a poll, and kind of submit their contributions that way. And I think that it really points to questions of pedagogy and whether we're trying to just transfer what we were doing in classrooms to the online environment. Is there this sense that as an instructor, like, I want to see your faces because you need to be looking at me as the instructor all the time? That's transferring the in-class pedagogy that really needed some rethinking anyway. And if we're thinking about I think this is an opportunity to really reimagine what our spaces of learning can look like for, equitable, relevant instruction that really aligns with how our young people are making meaning in their everyday lives. What is, this, if we think critically about our adherence to perhaps the ways that we learned in schools, what's behind that? I think we can think of this moment as an opportunity for growth in our own learning as instructors, and say, what might I, from a learner stance, need to unlearn and relearn as I move forward? And I know that's a tough question, and I see these questions in the Q&A that kind of are oriented to this sense of like resistance and things like that. But I think what's happening there is that we're flipping the experiences that many of our students have felt. Like, I don't want to do it this way. And now there's this like, we get to see what it feels like to be on the other side when learning is not really fitting what we would like it to be. Like, we're having to grapple with those tensions. And I think this is a moment of opportunity to imagine, what are we going to do with that? Are we going to use this broad range of resources, privilege, opportunities that we have to really rethink our pedagogy and our ways of like transforming learning in this moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, that was really well said. So I want to offer a specific example of doing that, I think, through a question that came through chat. But how have you all used Flipgrid or other like video posting? So it isn't just writing in response, or collaboration tools, I think, could come into this too. How have you used those kinds of tools to perform assessments? And have you seen that useful and good for all students? Or do you see an equity gap show up in those kinds of things?
I've used Flipgrid, and I've used the Voicethreads, voice memos. I've used voiceover slides. I use, for one assignment, what I've learned through this pandemic and just my years of distance learning and online pedagogy, is that it's helpful to have maybe one or two options of submissions for students. I think that's the differentiated instruction that comes into play. And so I give students a few options to submit assignments. And I have a rubric that says, if you're submitting a voice thread, this is what I need to see. If you're submitting a PowerPoint, this is what I need to see. If you're doing a narrative, this is what I need to see. And I just upload that rubric ahead of time. And I tell students to just select their best mode of delivery in terms of submissions. And that has worked well with me, just because I work with a lot of adult learners who work full time, and they have to have multiple ways of submission because of the demands of their jobs and things of that nature. And so I'm trying to just, have a little bit more compassion in terms of how I assess students in this space.
Cool. Lane and Sharice, I don't want to force every person to respond to every question, but if you feel like you have, go ahead, Sharice. I see you unmuted.
I just have one note around that. When I think of assessment of digital learning, especially if you're talking about the multimodal compositions or anything that they're going to submit, like a Flipgrid, the one thing that I'll say is just to think robustly. I want to think robustly about the criteria. Crystal, you mentioned a rubric, and I appreciate like multiple forms. And I know sometimes it can be like, well, I don't know, that I can imagine faculty saying that's a lot to give multiple forms of what they're going to create every time, unless it's like a final project. I've gotten that feedback sometimes. And so I think, yes, you do that. And if you're going to do like, everyone's going to make a Flipgrid this time. If we think about what kind of, what aspect of the artifact are we going to assess? Is it about the artifact? Is it about the content of the ideas? Is it the process for putting it together? Collaboration? Is it the particular like habits of mind that we want to see, that they're thinking like a geologist, or they're thinking like a scientist, or using certain literacies that we want to see? I think making those assessment criteria clear to students on the front end is also a way to respect them as learners, and being clear about what aspects are important to the process. So for example, I've had students who will, I've taught teachers, and so in their assessment criteria, they'll say, I'm going to have students make a podcast, and I want them to know that, yes, the artifact is important. That's how podcasts live in the world. You need to be clear in what you're saying. You need to have a message, etc. But really, it's also important how you come to develop this podcast as a collaboration, the peer feedback that you give one another. And I'm gonna have a separate portion of how I evaluate that. I just want to see that you've had this collaborative media making process, because that's also what goes into revision, et cetera, when you work as part of a production team. So there's some accounting for these different elements, or maybe it's only on one side. I think that can be important too when you're using digital tools, to honor the different strengths and assets of what students bring.
Very cool. And there's a question that came through about various learning styles, and I think I would expand that from the traditional learning style, audio, visual, kinesthetic, because we know from a lot of research now that those tend to weave in a lot more than was kind of thought of before. But just the individual students, how do you all really honor the individual? And I think, Charisse, you were starting to get there with that idea of multiple options. But are there other strategies you all use to really honor the individual in the online learning space?
I can start off. So the apps and tools that I put in the chat, so all of those you can click and drag. Like you're not just typing your response or anything like that. Although there are like corresponding worksheets that students will work on, like guided inquiry worksheets that they use in conjunction with the activities. But yeah, those two websites that I use, those two resources that I use, they're all like visual kinesthetic. And the thing is too, I've learned that I needed to honor how I process information as well. So I am super visual and kinesthetic, and I need to talk things through, so guess what? It shows up in my teaching and how, and honoring how students learn, right? Like things like there's like discussion assignments in my, in my class there, aside from all the visual kinesthetic things that they do with those apps. Yeah.
Very cool. Charisse, see you unmuted.
In talking about the individual, I'm reminded of having space at the beginning. Well, there's different things, but one is having a welcome survey in the beginning of the course to ask. This gets at the inclusion as well, and being able to give students an opportunity to share if there are things that they want you to know about them, and responsibilities that they may have in the class, things about their learning that you should be aware of as their instructor. And what that does is kind of normalize any kind of variations in what they may be bringing to the course. Sarah Goldrick Rab has a lot of research on this, and she founded the Hope Center for College, I think it's College Career Injustice at Temple University. And there's different reports that have come out of there around how to make your courses more inclusive, including that kind of survey, and thinking about basic needs, especially. Her research is around basic needs assessments and its importance in setting that foundation for humanizing instruction. And particularly when we think about students' learning needs, we cannot ignore that in higher ed. I've heard it said, I think Crystal was definitely touching on this earlier. We get our focus on our content and subject matter as PhDs and instructors in higher education. But we have to remember, like, we make up the institution at these levels, and institutions are made of people. Like, we have that responsibility to be people, and to remember that we teach people, not just content. And so with that, there is that focus on humanizing our instruction, humanizing our classrooms, and honoring the humanity of the people before us, So being able to do that kind of welcome survey, but also I think the key principle of grace and honoring that there will be that our students need space, and will continue to need space as learners if things are not things are not just going to go according to the plan that we set in place, and we need to continue to be in conversation with them.
So I am going to read straight from the chat. I think this is a really interesting question for you all and to get your perspectives. So Candace said that I recently went back to school to get my PhD after a decade as an adjunct, working at several institutions at a time and searching for a full-time position. Been there too, Candace, so no worries. Throughout my experience, I've had a few periods of relative autonomy over course design, but mostly I've had to work with what was designed for me. How do I work some of these elements into my classes when I am more or less powerless in that design aspect?
Yeah, I work off of a common syllabus as well. So, for some, because with ed leadership, certain content has to be similar across courses, but I mean, I use that as a framework. And then I make sure that I am able to take that and remix it to my own teaching and learning style. So, if there are major benchmarks or, key course learning outcomes or artifacts that students have to submit in a portfolio, those things are non-negotiables. So we're going to make sure we get those artifacts done so that students have the portfolio to move on to the next level. However, if the syllabus is saying, you have to have 12 discussion board posts, but my class is just so fatigued, I'm going to think through ways to get that discussion board information in a voice thread that was mentioned before, or perhaps maybe a group discussion, just figuring out innovative ways to get the content down, and to make sure that we're meeting those specific benchmarks for the course. But, we have a certain level of academic freedom that we can, use and support our students. A lot of times too, you can do a lot of individual things with students, sometimes during office hours. And, there's ways to make sure that you're still supporting students in that way. But I know that's very difficult. And so, I just say, do your best.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I'm not a tenure track professor or anything. I've been non-tenured actually, and I just celebrated my 15th year work anniversary. And it's very just like a little bit of time, like, let me change this one thing. Let me add this one more assignment. Because so I, just for context, I teach the chemistry for the non-science majors, and for a really long time, another colleague was also teaching this non-science chemistry course, and he had been doing it for decades. He just retired like 2 years ago. Like it's been that long. So he had been teaching this class for like 40 years, total. And slowly I started to teach like maybe like one lecture, right, and another lecture, and then and he taught class fairly differently. He's more of a showman, like, let me explode this thing in front of the class. But that wasn't me. Like, I wasn't willing to put things on fire, like as cool as that was. So, and he sort of had a stronghold of how the class was run. So slowly, this is where the educational technology way of engaging students really came through for me, because I'm like, okay, let me just do this one virtual simulation. Let me just do this one exercise. And then from the time I started doing that, it was probably like a total of 5 years to now, where I have, since he's retired now, I have full control of, anything and everything that was Chem 100, and then running, but it takes so much time. Also, I want to acknowledge the person that said, reach out to your academic technology staff. Like, I love my academic technology staff on my campus. I actually just got Quality Matters certified not too long ago, as well as peer review certification. So I can do peer review of other, classes too. But yeah, that training has actually helped me strategize, like, okay, what's the one thing I can change? in my class? And then what's the next thing? And then knowing that I have support to do that.
I did my Quality Matters certification last year, and I would wholeheartedly agree. Working with instructional designers and thinking through what you can change from that Quality Matters perspective has helped me a great deal. Thanks for lifting that up.
I wonder about working within constraints to work beyond those constraints around, for example, the use of educational technology or technology more broadly to help students make meaning with the content that we are mandated to teach or whatever's on the syllabus. So for example, if students have to do readings, what might it look like to allow them to do those readings in a collaborative way using a digital annotation tool? Like I work with marginal, or it's called Marginal Syllabus, this larger project where we use Hypothesis, an open educational resource that is for collaborative annotation. So you can annotate anything on the web together, as you can see what public annotations have already been made on articles or news, news reports, any website. Or you can do them privately. You can set up groups that don't require I saw someone said that they don't have access to discussion boards, etc. But you can do this on the web. And so your readings can be filtered through there using maybe a site like Merlot that also has open educational resources, etc. So I think allowing students to, again, thinking from this asset orientation, that we can do, we can pull in additional resources that allow us to carry out that formative assessment and those reader responses that allow us to get students to making meaning in those ways that are consequential to them.
Real quick, shameless plug. I'm the chemistry editor for Merlot. So if folks are looking for opportunities to be a peer reviewer, join the editorial board. So I'm in charge of that now. Thanks.
Very cool. Well, I see Elaine is answering a question directly. So I'm going to let Elaine let you answer that question because I think it was more directed towards you. I kind of want to, I know we're going to get close to time here, Norma, so feel free to jump in too if there's any other questions. But one just came through about accessibility of student services in the online environment versus face-to-face. So if you have seen that issue of just their accessibility to various campus services, if they're not physically on campus, and if you've seen any ways to encourage that or anything, because one thing that I just anecdotally, completely, this is just me, no research behind this probably, but I've noticed with some of my students is those students who would get accommodations or seek extra help or something like that in the classroom, I don't see that happening and moving to the online space as much. And I'm not sure what that barrier is, but I am curious what you all have noticed in that, if you have, or what you think. And it may be a a collective, one of those.
I just will say I haven't been teaching this semester. And when I taught at the start of the pandemic, I didn't necessarily see those changes, but I think the one strategy is around the syllabus statement that, again, it allows students a chance to see that it's normalized. So as instructors, we lead in saying, if you are having, saying, I recognize that this is a time of challenge, or, we all have different experiences that we're going through. If you're having any needs around, so you identify some potential challenges, you direct students to resources, and then offer them a very clear way to connect with you as a way to address some of those challenges or to talk more, but offering particular links to those services on campus is one way to just open the door, whether it's like disability services, mental health services. I know at Berkeley, we have a whole variety of basic needs services, including helping them sign up for SNAP benefits and housing resources, et cetera. So I think one key is like owning the responsibility, or the putting the onus on us to say, here are the resources. I've compiled like 3 or 4 key things that you might go to, and putting that on the syllabus, like at the top, to clarify that this is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and making it intentional space too within your learning management system so that they can easily access those links. So I put them in my syllabus as well, but I also put, like a folder, Blackboard or Canvas, and I just hyperlink everything that the university has because, if I can help them do that with a few less clicks, or, and sometimes I'm the only one there comfortable, especially my undergrads. When I taught undergrads, they would want to talk to me before they would want to go talk to someone in administration. And so it's just better to have kind of like a little one-stop shop on your syllabus, whether it be counseling center, student resources, writing center, everything you can think of that would need to have a fulfilling experience on campus or off campus within your own learning space.
Very cool. Yeah. I think I had a student one time tell me, if I have to look it up, I probably won't. So I was like, okay, I'm going to offer it to you. We are at 4 minutes now. So I would like to just kind of wrap up by getting from each of you, if you were going to give a faculty member or someone teaching online one piece of advice to really raise equity in their teaching, what might that piece of advice be? And you may have already said it today, so just a chance to kind of reiterate or add something new. It doesn't matter who goes in what order, so whoever feels.
So I would just reiterate some of the things that have been said a little bit earlier in terms of, thinking through our course design and our delivery, thinking about our own pedagogical practices. I also think that we need to be open-minded, like what Cherie said earlier, in terms of grace. And really ask ourselves, why are we here, right? Why are you teaching? Why are they learning? And how do we get to a space where we can support each other? And then, for me too, I just have a commitment to just being a little bit more organized because we're living in so much kind of chaos, whether you're navigating the pandemic, whether you're navigating coming back from virtual instruction to in-person instruction. We're just navigating a lot right now. And so the clearer I can be in my communication with my students and just letting them know that here's what I can do to support you, I think helps me with my just my culturally responsive approach to things. And then recognizing that we all have a different lived experience, right? I don't want to assume that a student has access to some things that they may not. And so I try not to take things for granted. Because I know that we all come from various lived experiences, whether it be race, class, gender, geographic location, family structure, etc. I just want to keep that at the forefront, and I'll operate with grace.
I'm happy to go next. I think given the myriad challenges that we faced in 2020, I think we're in being in a moment of what Zora Neale Hurston calls a sea change, where things have shifted so drastically and we've been forced to reckon with hidden, quote unquote, hidden inequities. I think that we must honor and acknowledge that every day that we show up, and particularly that our students show up, is a small miracle. There's a degree of resilience and persistence that our students continue to have. And while there are multiple, stressors and mental health issues, are at an all-time high, people are people who are showing up, that represents that they are trying and that there's something that they want to get from being there. And so I think then it's on us to really embrace this notion of design, right? How are we taking the ability to design learning environments that shifts the learning, to think about not what students are not able to do or what they're not capable of, what they're not doing, but really thinks about what they are doing, what they do bring to the classroom. If they're logging on, let's think about, give it a chance. If there are gaps, it's not because students are not capable, it's that something in the system is not working. And so we're gonna, what we call, rather than, we're mediating the system, we're remediating the system of activity to honor what students' histories of language and culture are already, what already exists. And so that might be thinking about partnership rather than a single authority. That might be thinking about this iteration in an open space rather than just like a stagnant view of what knowledge is. And it might be thinking about real world applications rather than just drills of how we, assess their learning. So those are just some ideas, but I think design is one principle that can hold us to face the future and continue to make the future that we want to see.
I'll keep it real short. So, people first. I'm always asking myself, like, what did I do today to connect with the student, and what did I do today to connect with a colleague? Because I think if there's one big theme from this, global pandemic, it's it comes to mutual aid and community. So, I think about, like, well, how is that showing up in my classroom, right? So many people need help and support, especially in these challenging times. So I'm always thinking, people first. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. That was fantastic. So Norma, I'm guessing I'm going to hand it back to you now.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm just doing the technology thing back here. So I would like to thank our panelists, Dr. Ryan McTaggart, for mediating, keeping the conversation going and really engaging our panelists. I would like to thank Dr. Bernal and Dr. Clemens and Dr. McBride for all of their wonderful insight into this inclusive teaching topic, as well as adding even more to the conversation. In terms of what's going on next, we want to thank our audience for being here and participating. We do ask that if you have the time to take a few minutes to complete our survey for today's presentation using the link that we are going to provide for you in the chat. If you've got something else going on immediately after, don't worry. We will also send you the link to the survey when we send you the recording, the link to the recording next week. But I really do want to thank everybody. Quick reminder, we encourage you to visit the Every Learner Everywhere website, our resources page, and our expert network page. Again, thank you to our moderator and panelists. Thank you to our audience for taking time out and participating with us today in our discussion. We look forward to seeing you on March 5th for our webinar, The Future of Learning, Every Learner Everywhere, Anytime. So everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.